Hello and welcome to the Roy Morgan Risk Labs June 2026 quarterly update. I'm Michele Levine. Our theme this quarter is Trust and Distrust in an AI world, and I want to show you something that took us a while to see clearly. One condition, distrust, is generating what looks like a dozen separate news stories. We'll get to the much anticipated brand rankings shortly, including a brand entering the 20 most distrusted list for the first time. But first, a word about the world these rankings live in. Here's the headline most journalists will take from today. Optus is still the most distrusted brand in the country, a position it's held since January, courtesy of a fatal 000 outage that Australians treated not as an inconvenience, but as a betrayal. And Telstra has slipped to 6th most distrusted before its own national outage on the 8th of July. Hold that thought, because the interesting question today isn't who's on the list, it's how brands got there and how they got off. Two definitions before we start, because they predict the strength or fragility of our top brands. Trust is the earned expectation that a brand will do the right thing even when no one's watching. Distrust is not the absence of trust. It's the active suspicion that a brand will put itself first when it matters most. One is a balance sheet asset, the other is a time bomb. A person with low trust is merely indifferent to the brand. They can still be won. A person who distrusts has already left the building. They're less patient, less forgiving, quicker to interpret the next stumble as proof of a pattern, and far more willing to take their story and their money somewhere else. Sure, indifference costs you growth, but distrust costs you customers, and then it spreads to others like a virus. So why do capable leaders keep being blindsided? Because they're not looking, or at least they're not looking where distrust lives. It doesn't show up in reputation tracking or NPS. Those instruments ask the wrong question of the wrong people. Distrust accumulates out of sight, then converts suddenly when an event gives it somewhere to go. Coles and Optus didn't develop a trust problem overnight. The measurement just caught up with the reality. So why does this measurement gap matter when brands already track reputation, NPS, and satisfaction? Reputation measurement companies like RepTrak ask people to respond to core drivers and then average them into what they call reputation. In RepTrak's case, there are 8: products and services, innovation, workplace, governance, citizenship, leadership, performance, and financial performance. Now, these are valuable. They tell you whether people regard your brand well across important dimensions. It's a positive measurement of your standing in the community. But none of those 8 drivers measure risk. Not one is designed to detect whether people are becoming angry, suspicious, or ready to reject your brand. They measure positive strength. They don't measure active danger. And when Australians are asked why they trust or distrust a brand, very few even mention reputation as the reason. Only 9% of people who trust a brand give reputation as a reason to trust, and only 6% blame reputation for distrust. In risk terms then, that makes reputation inconsequential. People think in much plainer terms: how they were treated, whether the value exchange feels fair, whether the company's honest. So how does all this play out in a world increasingly dominated by AI? In the real world, millions of Australians are already using AI tools: ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, and Canva's Magic Studio. This is no longer early adoption. So on the surface, it looks like a triumphant technology story. But adoption is not the same as trust, because the same population tells us this. 65% of Australians believe that AI creates more problems than it solves, and 1 in 4 thinks it could finish us off within 20 years. Sit those two facts side by side. Millions of people are using a technology they believe does net harm. So usage is not trust. Trial is not comfort. And we've seen this pattern before. Everybody kept shopping at the supermarkets that they'd started distrusting. Using a brand while distrusting it isn't loyalty. It's a queue of people waiting for a reason to leave, to switch to a competitor. Keep that in mind for the next 20 minutes because it sits underneath everything we measure. So let's first look at the nation, the backdrop against which every brand is now being judged. This is Australia's trust position, month by month, back to 2019. Before COVID, we were a trusting bunch. But since mid-2020, we've become more distrusting than trusting. That's 6 years and counting. The worst point was reached in March last year, when 70% of Australians distrusted at least one company. Sure, we've improved since, but look at where improved has us. 65% distrusting, 47% trusting. That's like a patient with pneumonia saying they're feeling better, still in bed and still coughing. How can we make this argument with confidence? Well, because we're Roy Morgan and the evidence is clear. Since 2017, our risk monitor has surveyed approximately 200,000 Australians, asking which companies they trust, which companies they distrust, and crucially, why. The why is unprompted and completely open-ended, so people answer in their own words. And that's produced roughly 600,000 brand nominations. This isn't a once-a-year scorecard, it's a continuous early warning system for risk trajectories, escalation and recovery. In short, risk intelligence. So moving from the nation to individual brands, and this is where the risk monitor earns its keep because we don't hand people a list of brands to choose. Australians name the brands they trust and distrust, unprompted, and they tell us why in their own words. What follows is how Australians think and feel. The top of the most trusted brand list barely moved. Bunnings, Aldi, Kmart, CBA and Apple, the same 5 as last quarter. That stability is the point. Trust at this level is a little boring, and boring is the achievement. Below the leaders, we see movement. Toyota and Officeworks, each up 2, and NRMA, likewise. Going the other way, Bendigo Bank fell 3 places, as fewer people describe it as customer-focused, while ING rose 4 places to 15th on the strength of customer relationships, emerging the winner in the long-standing battle with Bendigo by reversing the trend. The pattern below the top 20 shows Bupa up 43 places, GIO up 25, Bega up 22, and what's interesting is how they did it. Mostly not by trust rising, but by distrust falling. We have a saying at the Roy Morgan Risk Lab, you can't improve trust until you get distrust under control. Case in point, Bupa's gain is almost entirely due to people stopping distrusting the brand. Recovery, it turns out, usually begins with the negative going quiet before the positive says anything at all. Remember that, you'll see it again. And the other side of the ledger, distrust. Once again, no movement in the top 5. Optus, Meta, Temu, Woolworths and Coles, the same ranking as last quarter. But look at what's arrived and what's moving. Hancock Prospecting enters the top 20 most distrusted list for the first time, amid rising negative sentiment towards both the company and its proprietor, Gina Rinehart. Shell and BP slid on fuel price scepticism, people watching the same litre of petrol change price by suburb during the Middle East conflict. And OpenAI is deteriorating due to privacy concerns and the risk to people's personal data. Think about it. That's an AI brand sitting in a list of distrust otherwise earned by outages, court findings and price gouging. and it got here faster than any of them, without a disaster to its name. Qantas credit where it's due improved from 7th to 10th most distrusted brand. In this table, you celebrate the steps to recovery. Once again, the interesting moves are outside the top 20. Palantir, for example, deteriorated to sit at 30th most distrusted. One plausible contributor is GetUp's Who's Watching While We Shop campaign, putting Palantir, an obscure data company, into everyday conversation. Vodafone slid on service and relationships. Caltex and Ampol joined the fuel price club, but it's Palantir that's the instructive one. Most Australians had never heard of it a year ago. The insight is that distrust doesn't require familiarity. It travels digitally and virally. Palantir and its relationship with Coles is a good example of what is known as narrative economics at work. But that's a story for another time. Now, 2 case studies in how distrust converts, how the narrative of suspicion becomes a public scandal. Case 1, the supermarkets, where the courtroom was the converter. Here is Coles' full arc, and it demands a closer look. After being the nation's 2nd most trusted brand, Coles' distrust steadily built through the cost of living crisis and peaked in early 2025. Coles responded and did the hard work, and for a full year it was recovering. Then a federal court judge began hearing price manipulation cases. GetUp linked Coles to Palantir, and in May the court found the Down Down campaign had misled customers. The supermarket's distrust recovery stopped and turned. And the reasons people give for distrusting Coles have changed their tone. The fastest growing reason for distrusting Coles is now dishonesty, including the association with Palantir. This has overtaken complaints about price. What's happened is that people's grievance about pricing trickiness has morphed into a character judgment. One court finding undid 12 months of Coles' hard work repairing its brand. Trust is built one transaction at a time and destroyed by an announcement that went viral. And then there's Woolies. Woolworths is the natural experiment. Same industry, same cost of living crisis, same accusations, a near identical curve. Except Woolworths' distrust didn't increase this quarter, likely because its federal court case hasn't been decided yet. 2 brands, 1 verdict apart. If the court finds against Woolworths, Coles has already shown us what this chart will do next. Distrust is patiently waiting for the trigger to be pulled. Case 2, and the reason for our theme this quarter. Artificial intelligence is the fastest technology adoption in Australian history, running hand in glove with some of the fastest growing distrust we've ever measured. There are now 2 AI brands inside the 30 most distrusted, OpenAI in the top 20 and Palantir at 30, with Google deep in its own AI experiment, drifting in the same direction. Now reflect on what's missing here. No outage, no court finding, no price gouging. These companies have mostly delighted their users. The distrust isn't about performance at all, and that should worry them more, not less. Performance can be fixed, but distrust is hard to diagnose, and if you can't diagnose it, you can't fix it. Risk intelligence is the answer, but more of that shortly. OpenAI's chart reveals that trust is almost flat, while distrust has been soaring since late 2025. This is the reverse of the Coles trend. Coles had a large stock of trust that eroded. OpenAI signed up millions of Australians without first building any kind of comparable level of trust. So if an AI brand has its Optus moment, and one will, there may well be very little goodwill available to absorb the shock. In people's own words, OpenAI and its ChatGPT custom interface don't protect privacy, are unethical and are dishonest. All three are rising as AI reimagines the zeitgeist. And notice that these reasons are anticipatory. Coles critics described things Coles had done. OpenAI's critics described things they expected to do. Australians are pricing in the scandal before it happens. In risk intelligence terms, that is remarkable. The population is running ahead of the event. And just listen to the tone of the language. This isn't just consumers complaining about a bad customer experience. On OpenAI, ChatGPT, Australians said it has no consideration for ethics, society, and people who aren't obscenely rich. They knowingly take water and electricity from locals. The CEO believes AI could end the world, but runs the company anyway. On Palantir, they said their business model is to record every possible piece of information about people's lives. The important point is the moral language. Once a company is framed as an ethical problem rather than a service problem, discounts, product updates don't touch the objection. The challenge is no longer satisfaction, it's permission. And when we asked Australians what worries them about AI, they named unprompted a complete risk register. Losing the ability to think, inaccuracy, disinformation, scams and deepfakes, jobs, privacy, surveillance, the environment, loss of control. No consultancy drew up this map, ordinary Australians did. In their own words, these are early warnings, and they're free if anyone's listening. This is why we talk endlessly about open-ended questions. The unprompted answers give you the story. A percentage tells you how big the problem is, and the reasons tell you where it's going and what people believe is at stake and what they would need to hear before they can begin to trust. AI adoption from here will not be decided by model capability. It'll be decided when people believe they can trust that the risks are really understood and are being governed thoughtfully enough. That's not a technology question, it's a risk intelligence question. AI changes the tempo. It can create, decide and scale at machine speed. Trust does not. People still grant or withdraw trust at human speed. That gap is where risk accumulates. Risk intelligence measures the gap, where capability is running ahead of permission and where concern is becoming rejection before the feared event even happens. So why are so many of our most reputable brands and companies missing the point? Most are drowning in data and dashboards. The problem is not a lack of measurement, it's lopsided measurement. Trust, satisfaction, NPS, confidence, reputation, 5 ways of measuring degrees of good news, all worthy. But essentially, it's like navigating with a map that only marks the places you've already been and been made welcome. The danger signals are not marked. And it gets worse, because as we all know, the behaviour you reward is the behaviour you get. Tie bonuses to NPS and satisfaction, and leaders will optimise those scores and measure little else. The loop closes. Measure what flatters us, survey the people who already like us, report the good news upward. So when no one's ever rewarded for noticing a warning, people learn what not to see. We call that moral blindness, and it's a learned skill, taught by KPI structures, one incentive at a time. Board risk practice has drifted the same way into compliance. Are we doing what the regulator requires? Fine question, but absolutely in the wrong tense. It's backward looking. The real question needs to be in the future tense. Where are people turning against us right now? Which customers, which employees, which communities, and how fast? And remember, regulators are lagging indicators. Your rejectors are years ahead of them. The court cases against the supermarkets came well after the rejectors had turned their backs on Coles and Woolworths, not the other way round. And here is the deepest flaw. The behaviours that do the damage, warning others off, refusing to return, agitating for punishment, organising a boycott, these are not low scores on a positive scale. They're a different phenomenon. A positive-only measurement misses them entirely. The warnings are not being missed. They were never collected in the first place. The Roy Morgan remedy is not to reverse the scale, it's to invert the question. I'm delighted to launch the Risk Intelligence Operating System. We don't only ask, would you recommend us? We ask, would you reject us, and why? We don't just ask, are you satisfied? But what has made you dissatisfied and what did you do about it? We don't only ask, do you trust us? But do you distrust us, and why? This suite of products is the breakthrough brands need in the 21st century. So here's the position. Positive metrics show the surface. Our risk intelligence products show what's fermenting underneath. For a board, that's the difference between being reassured by a dashboard and being ahead of the crisis. Ready to head it off, turn it around on a good day, take advantage while a competitor takes the hit. In the age of distrust, the winners will not be the best loved brands. They'll be the ones who saw the rejection coming. And that's a wrap. AI is accelerating capability, distrust is accelerating consequences. The Risk Intelligence Operating System is how leaders see the gap early enough to act. Keep an eye on Telstra, watch the Woolworths court judgment, and watch the AI brands. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you in 3 months.